Hey everyone, welcome to Fighting Matters. I'm Steve Kwan. Got two friends here today. Got a longtime member of my community. I got Chris Ingram. Chris, how's it going, buddy?
All good. How are you?
I am also doing good. And we've also got Jimmy on the line from the YouTube channel, JimmyTheGiant. My friend, how's it going?
Hello. Yeah, very good. Yourself? Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too, man. I am actually really excited about this conversation. Maybe first, though, I'll give both of you a chance to quickly say hi and introduce yourself. Jimmy, you're the last one to speak, so why don't you go ahead and tell everyone a bit about your channel, just so that they know the kind of work that you do.
Yeah, so I make video essays that have kind of become sort of me educating myself on society, politics, history, all these things that kind of intermingle and overlap and stuff like that. I've kind of had a journey of going from, I guess, a young self-help type right winger, just sort of softly, like a Jordan Petersonite, one of those kind of people. Actually, at some point, I even got down the Tommy Robinson, Islam is invading the West type thing for a little bit. I kind of touched out that one early. But yeah, I was a little bit on the right, and I made a video called How I Escaped the Alt-Right Pipeline. And since then, I feel like I've created a channel around teaching people the things that I felt I lacked in my understanding that led me to a right-wing position. So yeah, that's kind of it. That's kind of what I've been doing. And yeah.
And that's how I actually discovered your channel. I love the content. As a Canadian, I find it interesting because much of your content comes from a British perspective, and it's completely different from the kind of stuff that I get in the news, but also there's a lot of threads underlying how that right-wing influence expands into our culture that I see here in Canada as well. And that's actually the topic we wanted to discuss today, and a great intro to our other guest, Chris. Chris, do you want to maybe talk about yourself and your work? Because I think that's going to be thematically what we cover here today.
Yeah, so I've, in the last year, have founded something called the Truth Collective. It's a network that we put together largely to fight and try to take the narrative back from the political, the economic, the social narrative that has taken hold in society as a whole, largely from the social media companies, the changing media environments, and then the conservative, what I'll call American style conservatism. And through that, I met Jimmy. And one of the things that I found fascinating about Jimmy was in his description of how he came out of the alt-right pipeline that he had found himself in as a young man, and one of the ideas that we had in terms of how we would be able to fight back, was essentially a re-education program. And what I told him when we first chatted, I said, what's amazing about what you do is essentially you've become a civics teacher without realizing it, and that you're teaching young people, about things that they would normally, maybe in school they don't find very interesting, but he's reaching and able to reach people that are not reachable by what I would call the intellectuals, or the bureaucracy or government, which I think is our youth, and that's our way forward. And that's how Jimmy and I met, and then I brought him into the network. I wanted him to be a part of it because he's got a lot of experience with working with young people and being able to reach people that I can't. So yeah, so that's sort of what I am and what I'm busy putting together at the moment.
Nice. Now, the interesting thing here about this call is it's quite international. I believe all of us are from outside of the U.S., and so I think we all have perspectives of how the political system in the U.S. has kind of bled into our countries. I mean, up here in Canada, as you know, Chris, one of the top exports from the U.S. right now is far-right ideology. That's something I wish they would put a tariff on, because, man, it is becoming a real problem, and it has really infected Canadian politics in ways that I'm sure we'll get into. But interestingly, Jimmy, from watching your content, I see a lot of the exact same parallels. And of course, there's differences, right? Because the anti-immigrant argument is quite different when you share a physical landmass with a lot of those countries, whereas, here we're kind of waterlocked everywhere except for the US. So we hear the story in a different way. But the talking points are basically the same, right? You hear these, it's a common thread that is used to bring especially young men into this ideology. And the deeper they get sucked in, the harder it is to pull them back out. But you have been in and then back out through that journey. You have gone through the tunnel. And for those who maybe haven't seen your awesome video on this, do you want to give a quick summary of your story and what kind of pulled you into that world, and what made you realize that maybe this is something that is false and it's time to get back out of it?
Yeah. So I always sort of, when I analyze it, I see it from like a few different angles. So there was definitely a fact of just being a young internet kid, being like 13, going on YouTube, watching, I don't know, fucking Harry Potter pals, and the next video is like 9/11 was an inside job. And you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So you click on that, and then you see what seems to be like quite a well-produced documentary with some, I don't know, probably even an English sounding accent. So, oh, this must be legit. And then you watch it, and then next thing you know about the steel beams, you're learning about the, I don't know, the missing black box, and you're like, oh, why did no one tell me about this? And so, like, when I was young, it was kind of just random conspiracy videos mixed amongst, um, ironically, like economic leftist populist stuff. So, um, honestly, things like war on drugs. I remember I was like watching videos probably from the Young Turks as well as Alex Jones, often about things like, why are drugs illegal? And then you learn about the history of weed and stuff like this, and you're like, oh man, it was like used to uh, oppress Mexican immigrants in America. It was, so you're kind of actually learning both a hodgepodge of absolute bullshit and some real actual truth. But what it's kind of doing is overlaying, I guess, a distrust for establishment. Um, and then a sort of a feeling of, why am I not taught this in school, kind of thing. And yeah, so I, as I'm getting older, I'm like kind of just in passively, there was not really this left and right split. Like it was pretty much just sort of conspiracy theories mixed with a sort of anti-elite, sort of slightly anti-capitalist attitude in the internet in the early days, I guess, of YouTube and stuff. And then over time, I think as I was getting older, I remember meeting a friend at a job, and he was like probably the first genuine right winger I'd ever met. Like someone who actually would say capitalism is great. Like that isn't a thing I would have ever heard growing up. It wasn't even a thing. You wouldn't talk about capitalism. It was just like, we just exist in a system. You wouldn't think about it that deeply. And then, naturally as a young person, I think most people in the country would have a slightly anti-capitalist attitude. I don't know if it's through culture, through films, whatever. It was just sort of a slight distrust. Like, obviously, financial crashes happen. Like, obviously, there's some fucked up shit with the bankers and all this sort of stuff. But he started talking to me about, like how capitalism breeds innovation, all this sort of stuff. And it was new and exciting. And next thing you know, I'm watching Jordan Peterson of his recommendation, and I'm finding him very interesting because his opinion is basically sort of counter what I knew, and it was an area of information I'd never even heard. Like I hadn't really heard the genuine economic arguments for capitalism, not that much against it, but like for. And so then I found myself kind of going down this Jordan Peterson route. Bearing in mind I'm now probably 20, and I'm starting to want to become a man, grow up, get a job, meet a woman, all this sort of stuff. And so there's a sort of mix of things going on, which is just this sort of general interest into history and stuff that I'm sort of enjoying on YouTube. That starts getting a little bit more right coded. And then, the sort of looking into self-help motivation, that starts getting a bit sort of libertarian right coded. And then next thing you know, you're kind of like you've primed yourself because they also give you the enemy, which is the woke, silly liberals. And next thing you know, you're kind of just right wing. All of a sudden, at some point, you realize you're a right winger. And there's a part of it that becomes an identity. And you're sort of like, I guess I found that I was, you're young looking for an identity. You want to be different. and then being the right wing young 20-year-old is kind of different. So there's a lot of things, identity, material things, and just genuine intrigue into topics that I hadn't learned that much about, that kind of ended up sending me down this sort of super pro free speech. That was a big one. The Jordan Peterson free speech thing, Tommy Robinson free speech thing. These kind of like put me into that sort of pipeline. And then I came out, I guess, from a long series of making videos on subcultures and sort of discovering, relearning about British history through subcultures. And subcultures are kind of a direct reaction and rejection of mainstream society, and a lot of things that happen in politics through Thatcher, neoliberalism, and I learned about this. And then over time, I just slowly started moving out of it. And then it kind of like dawned on me that shit, I was in a real like strange place. And I don't know how I ended up there. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying here, it makes me think of something, Chris, that I know you've talked about before, which is that this whole distinction of left versus right that we grew up with might not be the most accurate way to describe what we're seeing anymore. The traditional positions of what would be considered left and right, especially what would be considered right wing, has really evolved into something different that in many ways is completely antithetical to their stated values. I mean, Donald Trump, for example, is probably the closest thing that America has ever had to a communist president, which is crazy when you think about it. But I mean, look at what he's doing right now. He's slapping, he's slapping massive tariffs on his own people and using that money to basically execute pet projects, to like redistribute to the farmers who he thinks are disenfranchised by his other actions. He's just arbitrarily taking money out of the U.S. budget and out of the Treasury completely illegally and just applying it wherever he sees fit. He's starting to literally nationalize companies. I mean, he's literally seizing the means of production. So the platform that he is executing on is in many ways a far left communist platform if you look at things the old way. But I am wondering if maybe left and right is no longer the best way to break down political ideologies. And so, Chris, I'd love to hear you maybe explain your model for what you think the best way is to identify. What is the real difference today?
Yeah. So the truth is that essentially society is being taken advantage of in the fact that we are told right and left. We are told terms are used undefined. Everything is undefined on the, if you're looking at social media, everything seems to be undefined, and you have these terms that try to create simplistic binaries. So you're either capitalist or communist. You're either right, you're left. You're either this or that, and it's done deliberately, maliciously. There's a concept that's been discussed. It's largely come out of sort of Russian propaganda, is what they call post-truth society. And over the years, what's happened is we've been pushed into this post-truth narrative. And that's the narrative that we're trying to fight. If you undermine institutions, if you undermine science, if you undermine experts, and through that undermining, you create a vacuum, and something has to fill that vacuum. And sort of the argument that I will make is that vacuum is being, so someone like Trump is not an ideological person. He's not an ideologue. He's not an intellectual, but he is transactional, and he is very good at what he does, which is create noise and attention. And as the economy has changed over the years to what we call now an attention economy, where everything is about attention, he is the perfect actor for that. Behind him is what is the frightening thing. It's this, what I call a perfect storm of American conservatism, or MAGA style conservatism, which came largely out of the white nationalist movement or the Christian nationalist movement. They're two sort of competing ideologies, but they work in tandem. And that came about through sort of two major events. One was the election of Barack Obama, which is the first, which caused a huge shift in what we'll call right-wing or conservative, Christian conservative populism in the United States, where they decided to change tack, and they created this narrative around what we call white victimization, um, turning young white men into victims. And what's happened over time is that that narrative has filtered into the mainstream. It was largely pushed through social media. I mean, if you look at what they call the alt-right, you've heard of it. Most of us have heard of it. You've heard of the founder was a guy named Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer was as a young child, as like an 11-year-old kid, giving speeches at neo-Nazi conferences and white nationalist conferences. This is not the alt-right. This is the right. This is sort of the neo-Nazi movement in the United States. And it managed to somehow rebrand itself, largely through targeted strategies. Um, and that was then co-opted by the Christian nationalist movement in the United States, and largely through billionaire networks. So you have these huge donor networks in the United States that very few people have heard of, but they exist. As an example, the same guy who started Turning Point USA, it's not Charlie Kirk, it's Foster Friess. And Foster Friess is a billionaire who lives in Montana, who also happened to be the original donor to the Daily Caller. I mean, it's not a big surprise that these networks exist. And that sort of narrative of left and right has actually shifted. So what is now the norm, which is American politics, is actually far right politics. So we've accepted it. And unfortunately, what's happening and what's relevant for Kieran and what's relevant for me and what's relevant for you and people elsewhere is that the United States is now looking to export that style of conservatism. So the same issues, and the interesting thing where Jimmy talked about immigration or Muslim immigrants, well, we had the same in the United States. The same thing existed was when we invaded Iraq. You know, it was Muslims were othered. Um, so it doesn't matter who really the target is, but you're creating an other. So you create someone to blame, and then you push narratives that shift the blame to those people away from the people who we know are actually responsible. You know, billionaires, media companies, large corporations. And that brings me to the next sort of event that happened, which was in 2010, the Supreme Court ruled against the FEC, or the Federal Election Commission, um, and allowed for unregulated corporate donations. So anyone could donate any amount of money. Dark money came into politics. And then these donor networks were on steroids, and they could do whatever they wanted, which is why you now, in the last election, you saw someone like Elon Musk able to spend $300 million to get the candidate of his choice elected. And so once you pair Christian nationalists, fossil fuel companies, and media companies with politics, because they want to sit next to the power brokers, you have what we have now, which is this perfect storm. And that is now, if you look into the UK, um, in the last 2 weeks, it was just revealed with this ID pass that, where is that coming from? Well, that's coming from media companies. So that's Larry Ellison investing $300 million into the Tony Blair Institute, who's going to now push forward for um, this type of data. And it's data collection. I mean, it's all about information and collecting information, you know, from the NHS. So that's basically for Larry Ellison to now get all the data on Brits, on their healthcare. And before Larry Ellison, who was it? It was Palantir, which is Peter Thiel. So it's these networks that are all coming together that's created this storm of what I call American conservatism. They're trying to get it into Europe, they're trying to get it into Australia, they're trying to get it into Canada. Um, and the media networks are providing the platforms to do it.
It works like such a perfect distraction because the big topic that all the like the very far right people in England talk about is like cultural invasion. They talk about, you know, our culture's being erased, migrants are changing our culture. So there's this sort of story that's being sold to them, which is there is a foreign entity that's coming in and taking something of yours from you. Meanwhile, it's literally happening through these billionaire networks and all these think tanks, an actual ownership over valuable things, because we have such a low resolution and a lack of true understanding of politics in this country, just as a general average, that people don't understand what ownership is, and that ownership is a lot, basically the most important thing. So there is someone coming in and taking your country, but that is typically incredibly wealthy people buying up everything and owning everything. But we get sold this, it's like a diversion tactic, which is like, that is really happening. So the way we get them to look the other way is by saying, look, it is happening, we agree, but it's happening from migrants and it's happening from this. And it's really scary. It's very much happening in the UK.
Jimmy and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, was as the narrative started to sort of creep into social media or into the media about a wealth tax, and Rachel Reeves had announced this wealth tax and they were going to push a wealth tax, suddenly there was a massive sort of wave of anti-immigrant sentiment coming out in the press, in the media. Why? Because who owns the media in the UK? It's owned by the people who don't want wealth taxes. It's no surprise. I mean, I was having a discussion not too long ago about it's a long story anyway. There was a woman economist, and basically my dad had given a presentation, and she said to my dad, no, your opinion about climate economics is not valid because you don't support the settled science that there exist two genders, whatever. And my dad and I were talking, and so I started to dig into it. She came after me as well, and I said, all I said was, I don't know what you're referring to about settled science, but it doesn't matter. So I started digging, and then I found that in the last 5 years, over $300 million had been spent on anti-trans media campaigns.
Jesus Christ.
About 80% of that money came from the fossil fuel industry. Why does the fossil fuel industry care so much about trans people? Well, because it means we're not talking about climate change. It's these constant media distractions and this constant sort of trying to wrestle the narrative to where they want to point things. That's what I'm doing in the work that we want to do with the Truth Collective, is to say, look, this is a social media company. This is what it does. This is how it tries to control the narrative, and this who's paying for it. And this is why. And the more people understand that, and that's why Jimmy's so important, because re-education programs, or getting people to understand the information environments they work in, or at least understand what are the cultural fights we're having and why we're having them, is really important. You don't hear a lot of, especially in America, about education programs on social media, or what is media, what is new media, and then how do you navigate those spaces. Where those education programs exist is largely in countries that border Russia. Why? Because the Russians have been running these disinformation and misinformation campaigns for the last 80 years, trying to, influence people on their borders. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and that's why I wanted Jimmy involved, because he understands that kind of, how that, on a personal level, he understands it, and he knows how to come out of it, and it's not easy. That's why we need good people involved in what we're doing.
The interesting thing talking to you guys is that whether we look at Donald Trump or Pierre Poilievre up here in Canada, or name your pick, every country's got this rising far right movement. Like you mentioned, Chris, there is this connective tissue behind the scenes, and it all comes down to a handful of extremely rich white dudes who are kind of funding this stuff, right? I mean, if you trace it back far enough, you're going to find that a lot of this money is coming from the same places, a lot of the funding. When Donald Trump was first elected, I think the mistake that many Americans made is they thought that, well, this is just a temporary moment of insanity, and the fever's going to break and people are going to wise up. And they were able to get Trump out of office in 2020, but there was really no remedial action taken to correct the problems behind the scene. And that money continues to flow in. It continues to get more powerful. I mean, Chris, you talked about Larry Ellison, probably going to be the future owner of, or part owner of, TikTok. That is absolutely terrifying. And people don't understand what that means. It doesn't sound that scary when you think about it. Like, billionaire investor takes stake in social media company, not a sexy news story, but especially once you start tracing back media ownership, you see that the playbook that corrupted so many minds in America with Fox News and the Rupert Murdoch playbook, it is very much bleeding into other countries. Up here in Canada, a lot of our news outlets are basically American owned now. And
Correct.
people up here are getting subjected to American talking points. We were able in the last election to deflect that when Pierre Poilievre, who was very clearly just plagiarizing out of the MAGA playbook, his policies were proven to be wildly unpopular at the time. There was a big backlash because of Donald Trump. Not only did he not win the prime ministership, he couldn't even win in his own riding. And that's a whole story in and of itself. But they're going to keep pushing this. He's still pushing his MAGA playbook. And as long as the money keeps coming in, eventually society seems to just cave under pressure if enough money is thrown at it, because we're not doing anything to stop this. And I mean, we can all talk about free speech and the importance of being open to ideas, but when a bunch of billionaires are buying up media and consolidating that and starting to use that to influence politics, which we have absolutely seen to an insane degree since Trump got reelected, this isn't really free speech anymore. This is basically Orwellian, just thought control at this point.
Correct. 100%. Paid and paid for.
It's so interesting to see how it's really made me reflect. Sometimes the right wingers say stuff, and if you listen to what they say and don't take their sort of diagnosis, they sometimes come up with interesting stuff. And they'll talk about like how Western culture values freedom, liberty, equality, and we're scared of losing that to Muslims with different attitudes. Like, that's something they say, and it kind of like vaguely touches on this thing of what actually creates progressiveness. And I'm starting to notice just how the opposite of what they say, just how whimsical progressiveness is. Like, when you look back in the 90s in England, a wife could be raped by her husband and that wouldn't get you put in jail. It was illegal for, like, you couldn't marry someone of the same gender very recently. And society, when you would poll them even 20, 30 years ago, their attitudes on those things were what we would consider like very regressive. And it changes so quickly. But then I've started to notice just how quickly, like growing up in the 2000s, it really felt like anti-racism was just the absolute default. Like, I remember when we was playing, like, we had the World Cup would be on in football. There was like these bands that were black and white, and it was called Stand Up, Speak Up, and everyone wore them. It was just like everyone was against racism in the 2000s, and everyone looked down at it. And now it's started to come back, and it's crazy just how quickly what felt like a really progressive cultural movement just has gone the other way. And it's made me start to value that, like, institutions and mass education, continuous mass education, is the only thing that keeps and retains these supposed Western cultural values, which are just cultural values. I think that framing's a bit stupid, but this idea. And then when I was making a video recently, and I go through like Iran, because I see the similarities in the Christian conservative thing coming out of America, and the irony when it's applied in England. In England, we're trying to sort of reject Islam or whatever. The irony that it almost identically mirrors what happened in Iran, which caused the Islamic Revolution, which was a rejection of liberal progressive values, which were brought in under the Shah of Iran, because the Americans and the British, we came in and we put in the Shah. And but they gave social liberalism, but not economic, actual economic prosperity to the people. So people were being sold socially progressive ideas. Women can drive, women and blah, blah, blah. But they weren't dealing with their material. They weren't dealing with their living standards, their housing, their actual personal financial situations weren't being dealt with. And so they ended up rejecting outright the concept of liberalism. And it's just so interesting to me how I'm seeing, like, in my lifetime, liberal progressive attitudes being rejected um, all in this sort of weird vain attempt to stop Islam and immigrants. It's like this complete irony. It just made, yeah, it's kind of made me cement the fact that I don't think progressive values are innate to any culture. I think you get a brief moment where maybe it's culturally relevant, and then you have to cement it into law and into like education, because it will just go. It can go very quickly if it's overpowered by billionaire lobbyists and all these media control, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Something that I have had to come to terms with recently is this realization that a lot of the things that I grew up with thinking to be true are not universally guaranteed like maybe I assumed they were. You know, I was born in the 80s, grew up in Canada in the 90s, and like you, Jimmy, it was, you know, I was taught from day one that about the evils of racism and the evils of fascism. I mean, I'm old enough that when I was a kid, when I was in school, I'll never forget, we had a Holocaust survivor come in and tell his story. And I'll never forget, his name was Peter Parker. How can I forget a guy who's named after Spider-Man? And, you know, he came in and he told us his experience in the camps. He showed us the tattoo that the Nazis tattooed onto his arm. Um, I've been to museums. You know, I remember going to the British Museum, seeing the World War II exhibit, and there were Holocaust survivors walking around in the exhibit. One guy I remember walked up to one of the pictures in the exhibit and showed his son and said, "That's me in that picture." They had like a photo of, you know, a photo from like the 40s of liberating one of the camps. And the guy pointed there and showed his son and said, "That's me in that photo in the fucking museum." And this next generation, man, this really makes me realize that it's true what they say about, you know, humans having short memory generationally, because if you are 20, 30 years old right now, you didn't have the privilege of having that direct connection to the past like I did. You know, there aren't that many Holocaust survivors still around who can visit high schools, right? They're aging out. There's much fewer of them now. And so for a lot of these people, I think their only touch point with the evils of fascism is like crappy movies that they might have seen here and there, right? I don't think to them, the idea of Hitler and Nazism is so far back for them that they don't really have the same just visceral rejection of it that we might have had because we were closer to it. Now I mean, for a lot of them, they think it's funny to be edgelords and to spew Nazi stuff. And that has allowed that to get renormalized back into society. And it's been terrifying, like you said, Jimmy, how quickly that's happened. Just over, you know, less than a decade, we've seen things go from, you know, the whole idea of just being publicly racist has gone from being completely unacceptable to now something that the right is considering a virtue. I mean, look at Charlie Kirk, right? I mean, they're basically trying to canonize this guy, and this isn't to in any way to endorse what happened to him, but if you actually objectively look at what he stood for, it's a white nationalist platform, something that would have been unthinkable to bring into mainstream politics back in 2010. But I would say that now it's the default Republican position in a lot of ways.
The thing that I find weirdest about about that point you just made is that that people online or whatever, you know, that are having discussions about it are like, no, that's not what he did. He was just wanted to reach young people. But I mean, he was proud of that. And he was openly proud of it. And not just that, Turning Point has a PAC. It has a political action committee that works directly with the Republican Party. I mean, it's not just this benevolent organization. And the guys who founded Turning Point have, again, this goes back to these networks, was backed and funded, and they have a mandate. It's called the National Apostolic Reformation and the Seven Mountain Mandate. And they have explicitly stated that they would like and are funding a white Christian nationalist takeover of the seven mountains, the seven pillars of society, the media, education, the government. And they want to put white Christian nationalists in positions of power to affect political and institutional change to turn the United States into a Christian nation. This is explicit. He was explicit with it. He had people from the NAR movement and from the Seven Mountain Mandate movement speaking at his conferences. This was not a secret, but for some reason, when you see the discussions about it, they disavow it. You know, it's this is our policy. This is what we're going to do, but we won't. But we're going to deny it, and we're going to deny it, and we're going to deny it, and we're going to deny it. But then and all I encourage anyone listening to me who doesn't want to believe me, I say, go and look, do your own research, have a look at the NAR movement, look at the Seven Mountain Mandate movement, look at the IDU, the American Conservative Union, and from that, and what I was talking about earlier is those organizations and those think tanks that exist used to be largely American. So CPAC, everyone's probably heard of CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, and they hold conferences in the United States. And they had Viktor Orban come over from Hungary. In 2017, CPAC was exclusively American. It now has offices all over the world. Why does CPAC have offices all over the world if they're not wanting to export American conservatism? I mean, it's just they have partnerships with the American Conservative Union, and they have partnerships with an organization in the UK called New Direction, the one that I mentioned earlier, the Tony Blair Institute, the European Conservative and Reformists, who are representative in the European Parliament, and they're all and Stephen Harper is chairman of the International Democratic Union, which is another political think tank pushing MAGA conservative values. So that has become the largest American export, and that is all fueled and funded by media organizations that have been, as you mentioned, consolidated, that are now owned. You know, who owns the media in the UK? Who owns the media in Australia? You look at Fox News, you look at Rupert Murdoch, they all have interests there. So it's all sort of forming this, and I love using terms because it is normally projection, a new world order based upon, so everything was projection, right? Everything, the cabal, the George Soros, that exists. It's just not who they say it was.
Yeah.
Which
I
is terrifying and frightening.
I was just thinking, like, when I was on the right, one of the things, so like, I used to maybe hear leftists say stuff like, these billionaires, they want to control the world, blah, blah, blah. And I'd never understand it because when I was on the right, I didn't understand what they would ascribe the motive to be and why would they want this. And when I was on the right, what their argument was is there is this group that want to control the world, and they ascribed the motive, which was that they're leftist, they're Marxist, and they all want equality in everything, equality of the genders, equality of absolutely everything. And so that pathology of seeking equality is why they are trying to destroy the world, because, blah, 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 blah. They're seeking equality and everything, and that's undermining everything. So everything has to be equal and even, and that's causing, like, it just doesn't work in reality. That was kind of the framing. And for a long time, I never quite understood why billionaires would want a like white supremacist world. Like, to me, it just wouldn't make sense. And I think it's like over time, and this is where, again, it's like the deeper you understand these things or the more you look into it, it is super helpful. Is like I started to understand more about like aristocracy and sort of these attitudes that are quite common historically. That is that the ruling class deserve their position. And when you look at like the links from fascism to social Darwinism, so like um, after Charles Darwin, you have his cousin, I think, or something like that, right? And there's this guy called like Francis Dalton, and you have these people that sort of create the origins of eugenics, which is beforehand it used to be a religious justification for hierarchy, and then they created a scientific,
Correct.
quote unquote, justification for hierarchy, which is that the strongest survive, the fittest rule the world and should rule the world because they're the most competent and the strongest. So there becomes this like logic to the system, and it's pseudoscience because humans are socialized creatures. We're not animalistic. The whole point of society is moving away from our complete animalistic tendencies. That's like what our story is as a creature. But they can sort of like draw back to nature, and that's where the ideology comes from. So like there is a motive, and it does make sense. These people truly believe that they are, if by God or if by nature, granted control of the world. They are superior. They believe they are superior. These people, to become a billionaire, you need to be pathologically driven by competition. And people like that, I mean, like, you've met them in your friend groups. Like, I used to always think these people, it just seems so like a story from a film, but you have met them. Like, the person that is incredibly competitive in every situation ever, the person that needs to win every conversation, every joke and bit of banter, they can never take it against them. They always have to give it out, and they always have to come off the top, the coolest guy in the group. That is the pathology of these people. But they have just managed to amass immense wealth, and to the point where they see the whole world as this game. So it makes sense. There is a logical, like, way of thinking. It's obviously just fucked and doesn't really work in the real world, as we've seen it play out, Nazi Germany, etc. But there is, like, I used to always struggle with this idea of why are they so driven to want to rule the world like this.
Well, I think another very practical reason why they do this is because in a world that is increasingly getting more interconnected, and as more and more of the economy becomes digital, cross-border differences in legal frameworks become way harder to work with. So as an example, right now, at the moment, basically the entire American economy is propped up by the AI bubble at this point, right? I mean, there was just some research that came out, I think yesterday or the day before, that showed that if you were to take out the small handful of companies that are basically propping up the economy within an AI bubble, GDP growth is actually like 0.1%. The economy is flatlining if not for that AI bubble. So tech is huge at the moment, and that proves to be, if you want to export your tech into other markets, legal frameworks prove to be one of the biggest obstacles. So as an example, in Europe, and just due to the history of the UK's involvement with the EU in the past, the UK as well, they tend to have stronger legal frameworks to protect citizens from being exploited by tech companies. So most notably, the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which just wreaked havoc on a lot of these tech companies, almost a decade ago now at this point. That is a major impediment to the growth of a lot of digital companies if they want to go into other markets, because it prevents them from just easily harvesting people's data and doing stuff to people without their consent. If you can start eroding faith in culture and ultimately getting those legal barriers stripped down, there's a lot more money to be made by folks like Elon Musk and Larry Ellison if they can just get into those markets and treat Europeans with the same impunity that they treat Americans. We see this up here in Canada as well, where we do have some degree of digital protectionist measures in place. There have been, we've had agreements that require like a tax to be paid if social media sites want to come in and aggregate news from it. It's been a whole thing, and the end result is right now. Chris, you've probably seen this. Yeah, if you open up on Instagram or on Facebook, a lot of news sites, you'll get a message saying that this has been blocked, and it's because Facebook and company don't want to pay those taxes. Those barriers are there to protect Canadians from essentially having the news space and the public space completely bought by American companies. I am sure that these companies would love to have those laws removed so that they could treat Canadians the same way that they treat Americans. There are very practical reasons why these billionaires want to go and influence these other countries as well. Like Elon Musk, when he goes to Germany to support the far-right movements there, part of it probably is because of crazy, weird race beliefs he has, but another part of it is probably because if he can influence the government there, like he did in America. Look what he was able to do with America. They literally gave him the keys to the government, and he was able to go in with a handful of Goonie interns and basically just shred the government and harvest data. I'm sure he would love to do the same thing in Europe as well. So I think that's probably part of it also.
I think on a
100%.
general level, people are so not used to that level of complete cynicism and nihilism interpersonally, because usually that kind of character would not make a lot of friends. So like, it's so rare to meet someone that is genuinely that cynical that it almost becomes unthinkable to think that someone like an Elon Musk would be willing to allow countries to fall into nationalism and fascism for his own benefit. Like, it seems so abstract as a concept to wrap your head around that someone would be willing to do that. But again, it is what I'm saying. That's why understand the pathology of these people is important. And just look through history. There's been they're either complete losers in life or exceptional winners that then end up just destroying the world through their success.
I mean, it's so interesting that you say that, because even 2 nights ago, I was at a dinner with the CEO of a big marketing company here, and we were having a discussion about very similar discussion, and she said to me, "Yeah, but Chris, Facebook is free. It's been free for people all, And I just looked at her and I said, Facebook isn't what you think it is. No, it's a platform. No, it's an information gathering site. And the people who participate in it are unpaid employees of that site, because they're the ones putting the data into those algorithms and into the information bubble. We have become essentially, the term was, someone used the term techno feudal serfs.
Techno surf.
Is
Yeah,
essentially,
yeah.
we don't know that we are participating as employees to these media companies by providing them every click is a data point, which they monetize. And there's no benevolence to it. There's no greater good to Elon Musk or any of these people. As you said, it's financial, but ironically, there is a weird little shift in the right, or the right. I hate that term, but in that area, because the guys that's sitting in Silicon Valley, they're ironically, the four are South African: David Sachs, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Botha, and the grandson of Pik Botha, who was head of the National Party in South Africa. They're all from South Africa. They all have a view of the world, a very specific view of the world. And I say it's white, and it's Peter Thiel is part of what they call the trad movement, which is revisionist Catholics and they all love Curtis Yarvin, who has this weird, I swear it's a Bond movie, weird vision of the world that's going to be taken over. And it sounds so stupid when you say it. It
Yeah,
really
yeah.
does sound stupid when you say it. But it is, and when you start looking and digging, you start realizing that this is a reality. And Trump is purely the transactional guy that sits at the top of it, and he's going to make billions of dollars selling Bitcoin or whatever, or trade rights to the Emiratis or whoever. And everyone working behind the scenes is doing all the hard lifting, and it undermines what I would say would be the post World War II democratic order. The whole purpose is to undermine it. Jimmy and I have spoken about it as well. Who's involved? The Chinese, the Russians, state and non-state actors that are directly involved in undermining those institutions, and it all sort of fits together. But trying to get people to understand what's happening is it's just not easy, and you're constantly distracted by something, and that's what
Yeah.
that strategy, the Steve Bannon flood the zone strategy, is just keep throwing shit at people so that they can never focus on what is and that's what the Truth Collective is about, is to focus on there's one thing: the misinformation and the networks that provide it. There's one thing. If we deal with that, you can then deal with climate change. You can then deal with democratic institutions. You can then deal with economic policy. You can then deal with issues. And the irony of the whole thing is, the right is, as a person, and I don't say the left, but who's a humanist, I believe that people have the right to be themselves. I will fight for the right for a Christian nationalist to be a Christian nationalist. I will fight for the right for people to be what they want. I will not impose my set of values upon somebody else. Whereas the vision of the world that they have is, this is our vision and everyone must follow our vision, which is, autocracy, theocracy, whatever you want to call it. That is it. So, when we hear, the mayor of London wants to bring Sharia law into the UK, I just rub my face and go, yeah, it may not be the mayor of London you should be worrying about. It might be those other guys
Yeah.
that want
It's
to
the
force you to
irony.
believe something.
It's the irony with these conspiracy type theorists is they're always so close. They're so nearly there. but they've been deliberately led astray. There was this old expression which was something like anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools or something like that, where it's like it's deliberately tailored. I mean, that is what fascism, or at least Hitler's fascism, was quite literally just reactionary movement opposing communism and opposing socialism at the time. It created its ideology sort of alongside that movement. So it took the language and it took the ideas of what are sometimes real truths, like, billionaire control of the world. They just talk about the Jewish ones. They just don't talk about all the others. And it's like they take true things. They talk about collective identity as a nationalist ethnic identity. So they take truisms and then just distort them. It's like this, and it's always in the vested interest for powerful, because at the end of the day, there will still remain a powerful hierarchy there, and that's what they want to maintain. So they know to play the game alongside it. It's fascinating, but it's also terrifying. It sucks that it's happening in real life, not just a movie I can watch and enjoy.
Yeah, it makes me think of, you guys were mentioning this earlier, but this whole conversation, it sounds absurd, right? We sound like crazy, loony conspiracy theorists. And if you had a time machine and you could go back and 15 years ago, play this back for me, I'd say these people are fucking crazy, right? But the problem is, and Jimmy, you touched on this quite well, that with a lot of these conspiracy theorists, they always embed a kernel of truth in it. Often they accurately diagnose the symptom, but then where they mislead you is in the cause and in the behavior they want to steer. I mean, yeah, it's true that most Americans are suffering tremendously economically right now, but their rage towards that is misplaced. And the difference between what's happening now versus a lot of the far right conspiracy theories that people get sucked down is that this stuff that we're talking about is provably true, right? I mean, Kamala Harris, when she got up and talked about Project 2025 and said, Donald Trump is going to do this. And Trump said, no, I don't know who these people are. I will never do that. I think a lot of Americans probably heard this whole Project 2025 thing and thought it's just a conspiracy theory, whatever. Donald Trump said he doesn't know anything about it. I believe him. They voted for him. Well, guess what? Half of the Project 2025 agenda has already been implemented. It's been less than a year. Russell Vought, one of the key authors behind it, is effectively running the U.S. government right now alongside Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance. This shit happened. And so the problem with a lot of conspiracy theories is, I mean, there are real conspiracies, right? So it's not that these things don't happen. It's that you have to look for fact and what you can actually prove to be true. A lot of the conspiracies that the far right believes are provably untrue once you start looking at where the data comes from. But there are organizations like the Heritage Foundation, like Project 2025, that are actually trying to execute on this stuff. And you can see it with your own two eyes. There's tons of data that demonstrates it. But what these far-right provocateurs are so good at is, as you guys mentioned, they will turn it around and project and accuse the other side of what they're doing to give them covering fire. That is a long time playbook from the far right, right? They will accuse the other side of what they're doing so that all of the heat goes over to them, and then they will silently do the exact same thing. I mean, just look at Donald Trump or the MAGA movement. Everything 5 years ago that they were freaking out about how the left was going to do, they've done that exact same thing, right? Like every single thing. You take your favorite anti-left-wing talking point that is going around right now, go back in time, and what you will find is that Donald Trump's administration is doing exactly what he was criticizing Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Kamala Harris for doing. It's the exact same thing, except he's doing it way worse than they ever could have. One of my favorite examples, Hunter Biden's laptop. Oh God, they were so obsessed about that. Look what is happening now. Look at how Trump is enriching his own family, right? They had this basically conspiracy about Hunter Biden, and the amount of criminal activity that Trump's own children have done dramatically dwarfs anything that the quote unquote Biden crime family, as Trump would call it, did. You take a look back at the Benghazi shit that they were so up Hillary Clinton's ass about. Donald Trump is literally murdering Venezuelan fishermen right now, right? These are extrajudicial killings. They're murders. That is far worse than anything that Hillary Clinton was ever accused of doing. Hillary's emails, right? Donald Trump's whole family has been proven to have their data on private servers all over. Donald Trump was keeping top secret government records in his bathroom. Everything that the right has accused the left of doing, they have done 100 times worse. So there is some truth to the conspiracy there. And that's how conspiracy theories suck people in, because they do often have some kernel of truth to them that makes them resonate with people. But they intentionally and deliberately misdiagnose the problem for the purpose of misleading people and getting them on board with these crazy agendas.
Yeah, and
Yep.
it's like it's the anti-establishment feeling of it. So what a right-wing populist does really well is they read the room a bit, so they can feel that if living standards is falling, if inequality is skyrocketing, there is a tension that people are going to feel in their lives. Like they're a bit more stressed, a bit more cortisol in the blood, like they're going to be not in a good position. And what the anti-establishment, well, what they do is pretend to be anti-establishment. So they say, look, the current order is not working, and then we need to change it, which is, that is true, that is fair. But then what they're changing it with is obviously the fucked up thing, and it's worse. But it's like what they are doing, and it is equally just the fault of, I guess, the liberal establishment for, since the financial crisis, to basically allow living standards to completely deplete, for people's lives to get worse and worse, and they could never fix those things. They were never willing to fix those things. And therefore, at some point, you can be as progressive on social issues as you want to be, but if people's living standards are declining year and year and year, and they don't feel hope and optimism about the future of their country, then they're in a perfect position for someone to come along and be like, look, things are getting worse. And the people who keep telling you that, you need to think like this, you need to be liberal and progressive, they're not actually doing anything good for you. Maybe their whole thing, maybe everything they believe is wrong. Maybe liberalism is wrong. Maybe all of this is wrong. Maybe we need something else. Maybe we need to go back to something. Maybe we need to. So it's like the right wing populist is correct, but in their reading of something is wrong with the
The
establishment, correct.
situation. Yeah.
Yeah, with the situation, but then they obviously use it manipulative. It's like, you see someone in trouble and you're also a criminal. So it's like someone's been robbed and then you rob them again, but you do the whole thing. I'm sure it's happened where someone's like been a victim of a crime and then someone comes along acting like they're going to help them, but then they rob them again or something. I'm sure that's happened. It's like, it's quite a clever way of manipulating people. Yeah.
Adding to that, I mean, you also have this. So as I mentioned, the Supreme Court ruling in favor of Citizens United is you have political donors on both sides, right, left, Democrat, Republican, and if you have political donors, so was what's his name, the congressman in New York, Jamal Bowman, who spoke up against what was happening in Gaza. What happened in a congressional election? I think the record spend was in a primary, not in a so in a Democratic primary. APAC funded to the tune of $24 million. I think the record prior was like 2 million or something. They put $24 million to get to oust him. So if you allow for that sort of unchecked capitalism, you're sold to the highest bidder. So until you deal with money and politics in that sense, and I think Australia in the last couple of weeks passed a law capping corporate donations to $50,000. Yeah, you got to do it. If you otherwise, it's you're paying to the highest bidder, because I don't care, Democrat or Republican, and I think Bernie Sanders will talk about it probably the most, or Elizabeth Warren will talk about it a lot. But yeah, if you don't get big money out of politics, then big money wins all the time, and the media environments are rife for that. And the people who get screwed are going to be the young people, because if you start looking at real economic policy and real economic implications. So debt, like a big one with Trump is the tax cuts that are going to balloon the deficit. Somebody has to pay for that as the interest rates come and in the future. And who's going to be burdened with those interest payments are the people coming in the future. So it's just kicking the can down the, whatever the term is, kicking the can down the proverbial whatever to the next generation. And that's going to have real economic implications in the future, because the concept of capitalism, I mean, capitalism is not finite. Capitalism is finite. You can only grow so much. and wealth can only accumulate so high without filtering down, because at some point there's no one there to buy your shit. If you
Yeah.
keep producing shit and no one can buy it, well, I mean, currently, you guys spoke about it, you have the highest levels of inequality in the United States in the last like 70 years. Yet you have a record stock market, as you mentioned, driven by 4 or 5 companies, and you have consumer purchasing power that looks, when you look at it, is up. But if you look at how that breaks down by class, it's not the middle class that's spending the money, and it's not, poor people spending the money. It's the wealthiest who are driving spending. So the economic indicators are actually really bad at the moment. If you start looking at it, wage growth is not, wages are not growing. So we're in for some serious economic implications over the next.
So the whole argument with the inequality stuff is like, at some point, if their growth is so detached from the growth of the rest of society, they have so much additional capital, then it makes zero sense for them to leave it in a bank account for it to, like, you would be insane to just leave it in a bank account. So they are forced to buy stuff. But if you're in a stagnant economy, then they can only have one dinner a day. They're not going out and supporting local economies. They're buying mass resource and ownership over large swathes of the economy, and like that only goes one way. Like at some point, you have to start fixing that. Like it cannot work. And that's one of the things we always get. I mean, it's worse for Americans, but like if you say anything to the tune of like regulating how much capital can be accumulated by one single person, in America you'll be absolutely decried as some absolute radical, insane Stalinite or something like that.
Communist.
And it,
You're a
yeah,
communist.
but it's like,
A radical left communist.
yeah, but even if you just want the ability to have local businesses owned by local people, you need to have money that is in the hands of people to spend in those business. And if that money, if you end up having so little money as the working class, and all you can pay for is, I don't know, your food bills, your rent, and your energy, what money do you have to spend in local businesses? None. So that gets swallowed up, and you're just sending money to,
Swallowed up.
uh, and it's like,
Further
I always,
consolidated.
yeah, and it's like I always say, it's like I'm quite big on business and innovation. Like I think that was one of the things that kept me on the right for a while. Was like I love when I see, as a person myself, I ran like a parkour clothing brand and all this stuff. I love when people want to make things that add high quality value and purpose to society and culture. But that often comes from like regular Joes. I mean, I'm not going to say a big business has no role, but a lot of it comes from like that organic energy of an entrepreneur finding some sort of thing that needs addressing in the market because they're there and they live in the real world and they see the opportunity. But when you get such an unequal economy, you don't have real like innovation via markets. Like that disappears. It becomes this sort of rent seeking, and it becomes this awful economy that no one likes. Even the capitalists claim they don't like rent seeking. Adam Smith said rent seeking's awful. Like, it should be obvious, but people don't see it.
I am so glad, Jimmy, that you brought up the notion of rent seeking, because this is really the sign of a stagnant and problematic economy, is when companies are trying to extract value for nothing in return, right? This is often called rent seeking, the idea being you pay me and I do nothing. That's ideal. And one of the incredible things about tech companies, and the reason why they have been such a focus of growth for the last few decades, is because it is incredibly easy to be a rent seeker as a technology company because your cost of goods is so low. I mean, if I'm selling you hamburgers, no matter how awesome I am at making hamburgers, I still have to pay for the meat. I got to pay for the buns. I got to get that stuff shipped to a store. I got to have a storefront. It gets expensive. I can't get my costs down to zero no matter what. With tech, I can get my costs pretty close to zero, right? If I make a digital product, I can sell that ad nauseum with very minimal cost. Even better, if I can own the platform, basically I can own the means of transmission, then I can truly be a rent seeker. And if you look at pretty much every company out there that is dominating right now, they're all going for a platform play, which is they own the marketplace. They don't necessarily sell you a thing often, but they provide the means of communication or the glue that holds everything together, and they just charge a cut. Basically, they charge rent. every time someone comes through. Facebook, for example, Chris, is a great explanation of this.
Yes.
Their whole business is rent seeking. They make their money off of advertisers. The product is the customer who, as you said, Chris, provides their services for free because they want access to the platform. It's a brilliant model in terms of how they're able to basically get the labor for free. They're able to just extract tons of money for advertisers. There's no cost of anything they have to do. That's why Facebook can do crazy shit like invest in, AI chatbots and Web3 and the metaverse. It's because their costs are so low, they can just be completely decadent with how they spend money. OpenAI is a great example. I heard Scott Galloway talking the other day about how they've, their new Sora app, which is like I don't know why anyone would want this, but basically Sora is a digital slop social network. The idea is that any of us can go and blop in a queue and it'll spit out some AI slop video, and it's a social network just for people who want that crap. It costs them like $5 every time one of us goes and makes a video. They are losing money hand over fist, but they can afford to do this crazy dumb shit because they're just making so much money everywhere else. In the case of OpenAI, they're not even making that much money, but they're pulling it in from investors because
doesn't matter.
the whole tech.
I mean, if you look at the venture capital and the M&A and what's been going on, there's so much venture capital going into AI companies, and we're talking hundreds of $millions for some of just the absolute shittiest ideas you've ever heard of. Just I heard something in New York. They raised about, I don't know, $45 million or something, and it had something to do with dicks. And I can't remember what it was. I wish I could remember, but it was the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and it had to do with penises and dicks. And I was just like, oh my God. This is what it's come
stage
to.
Capitalism, right there. There will be innovation, but you generally are trying to position yourself, as you say. What you're saying about the platform thing is super perfect. It's like you can see in video games where gaming in the 2000s and the 90s, it was like an emerging industry. So, but yeah, it was an emerging industry. So it didn't have a massive market yet. And people were still innovating. You would just throw some money at some nerds and they had all the time in the world to make the game. There was no real deadline. And then they made the game and it was amazing. Everyone would always be like, yeah, those 2000s games were incredible. And then over time, money, it starts blowing up. And then you get to a point where you get Roblox and Fortnite, which are platform games, not platform as in platformer games like Mario, but platform as in like players of the game create games within that game.
Create the games.
And they're good enough. Yeah, and they're good enough. What people don't realize with
Yeah.
capitalism is like people don't tend to quality doesn't win. It's usually like efficiency, and sometimes just being familiar enough with a platform is enough and locked in enough to it, and it's just ease of use. You're gonna opt for that over even if another product's better, and like all your friends are even just something like as simple as that. If all your friends play Fortnite, that's now got you in, and like why would you all now move over to a different platform? You're gonna stay at Fortnite, so it keeps the whole economy. And it doesn't have to be the best. It just has to be good enough. And then it will hold it. It's why, like, in telephone companies, we pass a law whereby a telephone company is not allowed to own your phone number because they realized that was anti-competitive. Because at the end of the day, even if like the other network's better, the fact that I have to lose my phone number and I'll lose all of my contacts, it's just not worth it. So people weren't going to switch to a better service because it's just not worth it. And it's like those same rules don't seem to apply into these online marketplaces, online platforms that are basically feudal kingdoms. And they're rent seeking every transaction. Every time you want to park a car, you pay some Swedish company 0.2% on every transaction, or 2% on every transaction. It's like someone is making money off every action you do, and they're so detached from you. And yeah, and that money accumulates, and then they spend it. And what do they spend it on? More accumulation. So it's like, yeah.
The moment where I realized I had to get out of the gaming and technology industry was I remember someone was pitching this was back when NFTs and Web3 were a big thing. Someone was pitching to me this NFT Web3 VR hybrid. And the idea was like, if you buy this NFT, you pay however much exorbitant money, it unlocks access to this metaverse world that you can live in. And so you can have like the ideal life in the metaverse. And I remember they were giving me a tutorial of this, and it's this like, incredibly garbage like VR room that someone has. And the idea is you buy an NFT and you can have access to this like tiny virtual room instead of anything in the real world. And I remember sitting there watching this and I got this pit in my stomach because I was thinking like, this is the most dystopian shit I have ever seen in my life. You know, you're charging someone a tremendous amount of money to give them a fake virtual life, and you're doing so using NFTs, which are pretty much specifically intended to bypass all finance law, right? This is so fucking dystopian. That was when I kind of realized like this industry is not what I fell in love with when I got into tech at the beginning. This has now become the engine of extracting all of the value from people, giving them a fake dystopian life, and basically funneling all of the wealth up to a small handful of people. You brought this up, Jimmy, that with, you know, when you're talking about the economy, there's no, you know, we talk about money like it's this magic good thing, and that capitalism has this inherent value. It doesn't really. If you've got a handful of rich people who just hoard money and the economy stagnates, that is not valuable at all, right? What makes the economy work is when money is like blood. Money is literally the lifeblood of an economy. It has to flow. If it's not flowing, the organism dies. That was how we got out of the Great Depression, right? Basically, the New Deal was an attempt to spend our way out of the Great Depression, to get money flowing again, to get the blood moving through the economy again. And we are very much at a point right now where the rest of us, you know, the regular folks, cannot afford to spend. So we're all clamping down on our expenses. And the wealthy have increasingly captured basically everything, right? I mean, what AI really is it is a last-ditch attempt by the wealthy to come up with a new MacGuffin that they can use to sell to people to basically find one last way to make more money. But it's very quickly getting to the point. I mean, if you look at the economics, like of a lot of these new companies that are being propped up by investors, they're not really economically viable companies at all. It's just that these incredibly deep pockets are funding them because they think this is like the one last attempt to extract as much money as possible. But we are seeing that the blood in the economy is ceasing to flow, and that is really, really scary.
Yeah, I always think like it's so AI is so like it could have been amazing. Like it is the perfect revolutionary technology that could liberate the masses from all the stuff we don't want to do. It could free you up in free time. I don't think a single person has even had that thought because we understand reality. We've been through these tech revolutions. In the 2000s, when the GoPro come out, when the iPhone come out, when the Xbox 360 come out, we were like, oh, this is going to change the world. But it never does, because the free time it enables you is not free time you get for yourself. That's now unproductive labor hours, and that will be taken from you. So it's like that. It's who gets the reward of those things. The technology of AI could liberate the masses in under a different economy, under a slightly different attitude. It really would be incredible. But it's so funny how everyone sees it as this negative, and it's like we're all zombies walking off the edge of a cliff because we know the structure of the system we're in. All of the benefits will not filter down to the people, and it's just this complete irony. It's like poetic in a way. Like it's obviously it's like the end game final boss level of what the economy should produce. It should produce a thing that stops us having to do the worst bitch work that's possible. That's the point. That was the point of progress. That was the whole thing. But it did so under an economic system that's not going to filter that to the people. So it's like, yeah, there's a real poeticness to it.
I mean, that's my sort of personally, my fear with AI is that no one has ever really considered the human cost. Um, and that's, I mean, part of what the Truth Collective is about is making sure we ask those questions. So what is the cost? I was at a big conference with Barclays Bank, and the guy presenting, he said, look, in the next 5 to 10 years, not AI, just robotics alone will affect the job market, the global job market, between 600 and 700 million jobs will be taken out of the job market. What are the implications of that for people?
And why is no one thinking about that?
It's not in the mainstream discussion. People aren't thinking about it. And then I've heard, oh no, that we'll give them universal income. But the problem with that is, okay, you give everyone $20,000 a year, whatever you're going to give them, you take away this. I mean, work, whether it's menial work, whether you love your job, whether you hate your job, it's a sense of purpose. And if you remove a sense of purpose for people, then what? I mean, what am I just going to sit and game all day long? Or, what is that going to be for, imagine we talk about young men and some of the troubles they're facing. A lot of it has to do with isolation, not getting out. And then you want to remove the one thing that gets them out of the house to do something that's purposeful, where you feel, like
It
you
would
have a
almost be
value.
like,
Oof.
yeah, it would almost be like you would have to create like I don't know why I'm thinking so much about gaming today, but like you would have to create meaningless tasks that are sort of deeply fulfilling. So like it's like when you've played a game on like a hard, but you've got to a maxed out level character, and then you remove some abilities. So like the one I'm thinking of, I used to play RuneScape. It was like a RPG game, and you would get a really powerful character, and then you got to a level where it was kind of a bit too easy. So then you would start a new character, and you wouldn't let yourself do a certain thing. It's like as a society, we would need to just give people tasks. Go build something. Like we're working on building a church for no real reason other than it looks cool and everyone needs something to do. It'd be like that. You'd
I
have
mean,
to like,
we need to at least ask the question, right? I mean,
yeah,
look,
yeah.
I find one of the things when people come to visit, because I live in South Africa, when people come to visit in South Africa, one of the things that surprises them is that when they go to the gas station, someone comes to your car and pumps your gas for you. That has been done away with in Europe and Canada
A
30
long
years
time now.
ago. But here, it employs, I don't know, 100,000 people. If you take that away, those people are, you
I
now
noticed
have,
Japan. Japan has a similar attitude. Well, I noticed when I was there, they would employ a lot more people to do simple jobs than you would think are necessary. But it is, yeah, it's that acknowledgement that employment and a thing to do is so needed that that has its value in and of itself.
I mean, nothing more dangerous than a young man sitting alone with nothing to do but get misinformation and disinformation and be angry about it. I
Yeah,
mean,
I think he's part of a master race.
Well, this is exactly, I mean, tying this all back together, this is exactly how young folks get radicalized, right? Is
correct.
they correctly diagnose that they are losing opportunities. They do not have the opportunities that their parents or even their grandparents had, but they're misdiagnosing. I mean, if you take a look at the various countries around the world, right? I mean, in a lot of European countries, the far right anti-immigrant stance targets Muslims. In America, the far right anti-immigrant stance is going to target Latinos. Up here in Canada, probably a lot of Indians and Chinese, right? The common, and of course, it is different because it depends on what they perceive their enemy to be. But in pretty much all of these cases, I mean, it's not the Indians or the Venezuelans who are taking your jobs. It's folks like Sam Altman and Elon Musk and these kinds of people. And the big problem through all of this is that it is a handful of people who are accumulating all of these resources, very rich people who probably would be happier if we didn't even know what their names were.
Except for Elon. He wants us to know what's.
He's an anomaly. He wants everyone to know who he is. But, Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison, I am sure that they are pissed off that we even know that their names are attached to this stuff.
Yeah. Correct.
Well, I want to be mindful of time because I know you guys are ahead of me. As we tie this up, I would just leave this to you guys. Let's plug your stuff and maybe just tell people, like, what do we do about this? What can the average person do about it? I mean, Jimmy, you've got a great educational platform for this. Chris, you're looking to build something as well. Maybe both of you can talk about your work and how maybe people can get engaged with that to help counteract this kind of problem.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I guess like we're trying to build a network of people on the same kind of mission and effectively counter the very tactical strategy of what, Daily Wire, Turning Point, all these people did, but at least with honest and real information. And one of the things they were so clever at was how interconnected that whole movement was. When you would see it felt almost like reminiscent of epic fucking rap collabs when you would see Jordan Peterson go on Joe Rogan. You were like, oh my God, they finally done it. And it was like they made this ecosystem of very important pseudo intellects, but you were really kind of following, oh, when Sam Harris going to debate, blah, blah, blah. And it was like this ecosystem. And you know, for as much as I'll fault a lot of the information, they were good at entertaining and telling stories, and they did make you think about stuff. I can't say that I haven't gained some kind of introspection or something from Jordan Peterson. Just he went off in a different way with those findings and thoughts. So it's like trying to make a sort of competitive thing to that is deeply founded in science and factfulness rather than just purely narrative and emotion and, you know, sort of being scared of the shadows and creating false enemies and stuff like that. So I think it's, yeah, that's what we're trying to connect all these people. There's a lot of people. I think in the last 2 years, I feel like I've seen a rise of very high quality creators that are just more, yeah, more based in truth than anything else. So it's like trying to connect them all and get people singing off a similar-ish hymn sheet. So, you know, fighting uh, the hierarchy of problems, targeting the most obvious and um, obvious battles that we can all get behind, right? Inequality and billionaires owning everything. I think no matter what your opinion on certain social topics, certain other topics, we can all unite on that as a core fight. And just trying to get an organized collective effort towards, yeah, trying to fucking save the world. So, yeah.
So exactly that. I mean, the purpose behind the Truth Collective is to unify a lot of diverse opinions, and diverse skills and diverse capital. So I found when putting it all together that there was really good work being done, especially in the European Parliament, and foundations in Europe and in Canada. Um, but then when I would speak to one and the other, they'd never heard of. So I've been working with a lawyer in Canada who um, had helped draft, or I won't say too much about it. I'm sort of not supposed to, but it helped draft a resolution that was presented to the UN General Assembly on how to regulate social media and media regulations. And when I asked him, I said, do you know the Democracy Shield, which is the department at the European Union that deals with misinformation and on a largely from a security perspective. So a lot of these discussions are actually happening with the intelligence departments. So I know like CISA in Canada, it sits it's partly in their portfolio. So you have things being done sort of in different places. And the idea is to bring that together. There's capital, there's creators, independent media. Why can't we match capital, academia, regulatory frameworks, and start putting it all together to unify a voice, and present a unified voice instead of chasing, vaccine disinformation or that misinformation or climate misinformation, is to say, look, we need to start unifying our voice around what is the problem. Let's identify the problem. Let's make everybody know what the problem is, because we're up against basically unlimited budgets. If you really think about it, Larry Ellison, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, these are the richest, most powerful men on earth. And if we don't have a unified voice and a unified message, then, we're fighting a pretty much useless battle. So that's the purpose behind what we're putting together. And the larger that network is, and the more that network it gets spread, and the more people we have involved, the better. Like just like them, information and the email addresses, it all has value and meaning, especially for these kinds of things. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to put it all together, and then we're going to raise a pile of money, put on some conferences, get people talking, and then try to get that narrative under control, and not chase it around, and not let the media, whether you call it mainstream, whatever it is at the moment, sort of news media, chase around somebody else's narrative. We're going to try to put our own narrative forward through independent media if we have to, which is more than likely, and good people making good content.
That's a topic, man. I could do a whole episode on the rise of independent media and the collapse of corporate media, but that's probably a topic for another day. I'll put links to your stuff in the show notes, Chris. So if people want to find you to make that easy, Jimmy, I'll also put links to your channel as well. I always encourage people, if you're not following Jimmy the Giant on YouTube, definitely an interesting follow, especially for people like myself who are outside of the UK, because Jimmy, you talk a lot about trends that specifically impact the UK and Europe. And they're fascinating to me because, as we talked about on this call, you start to see crazy parallels between the directions that all of our countries are going in. And you start to see that, again, it's a common thread. And if you trace it back far enough, it's all coming from the same handful of rich people. It's a very interesting parallel between our countries and what's happening.
That's the point. That's the best point of this call. Is that these parallels exist across borders, 100%.
Amazing, guys. Well, I know it's getting late where you are, so I can't thank you enough for coming by and having this chat. This is really interesting.
Thanks, Steve.
Nice one. Cheers for having us.
Thanks, Steve.